Lead story, the question around that particular case, the South African extradition request to get Atul and Rajesh Gupta extradited from Dubai into South Africa to face charges of corruption. That was denied, apparently, by a court in the UAE. For some analysis, let's bring in Cathleen Powell. She's an associate professor of public law at the University of Cape Town, joining us from that very city at this point in time. Thank you for your time this evening, Professor. Is there any merit to this argument that the court in the UAE is making, saying that, since the money is alleged to have been laundered through Dubai or in Dubai, therefore it has jurisdiction over that case, regardless of if the money was dubiously sourced from South Africa?
Yes, there is merit. In international law, states have a very wide discretion as to what crimes they establish jurisdiction over. So if any aspect of the crime has happened in the territory in which the court is, it's pretty normal for that state also to claim jurisdiction over the crime. It's called territorial jurisdiction. That doesn't mean, usually, that it couldn't also extradite the person to the requesting state. But there might be a provision in a UAE domestic law that reserves those kinds of cases where the UAE itself also has jurisdiction for a UAE court.
So essentially, they could try the Gupta brothers in the UAE, and then after that, in theory, if the South Africans request it, send them over to South Africa to face trial for related charges?
Certainly, yes.
All right, then. So according to this timeline, provided by the Justice Minister, the UAE authorities kept South Africa in the dark pretty much from October through to March, despite at least 3 efforts to get updates. Ideally, that shouldn't happen. So what recourse does South Africa have now?
No, it shouldn't. Extradition arrangements are difficult combinations of interaction between the executive of the two countries, so the diplomatic services of the two countries, and the courts. So it's actually a court now that has looked at the evidence that South Africa brought and has decided that the technical requirements are not met for an extradition. But it's the diplomatic services that are meant to keep South Africa in touch with what's happening. And it looks like they didn't do that. There is more that South Africa could have done. South Africa could have requested to actually be there in the courtroom. It could have sent its own diplomatic personnel to watch the proceeding unfold. Admittedly, that takes time and costs money. So what they did instead was they asked to be kept in the loop. And it looks as though the UAE simply did not keep up with that request. It's difficult to say exactly what its obligation was, but if it is under an obligation to cooperate, which it is through the treaty, you would expect it to make a bit more of an effort. So we've either had a lack of political will, or we've simply had some incompetence here.
Indeed. So the UAE also being added to the Financial Action Task Force grey list in March last year. Given all the concerns that we've seen, and not just this year, last year, it's been a long-running concern for the better part of a decade now about hot money flowing into Dubai of questionable provenance. Does the UAE have the capacity to seriously deal with money laundering and corruption cases of this sort?
I must confess my immediate reaction on hearing that question is to recollect that South Africa was recently grey-listed too. And we are certainly struggling to prosecute the state capture cases that are starting to bubble to the surface now, because under the time of Jacob Zuma and the time that the Gupta brothers had so much influence in South Africa, our own prosecutorial services were weakened. So there may well be question marks as to whether the UAE actually intends to prosecute these crimes itself. I have not heard that it's actually arrested and charged the brothers itself. It's merely refused the extradition request. So I think it is problematic that the UAE could refuse on that basis. On the other hand, South Africa faces some challenges too in all the state capture related cases. May I add, it's interesting that having heard the news item that you did just before me, that the blackouts that we're experiencing, the load shedding, is one of the consequences of the Gupta influence in South Africa, because one of the institutions that they captured was our power utility provider.
Indeed, that's always worth pointing out. The sheer scale of issues that, of course, we had, especially with regard to state capture at Eskom, was a significant problem. Professor Powell there, Cathleen Powell from the University of Cape Town. Thank you.